BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, it's Anna Hill here with Farming Today podcast. This time the Welsh Government tries to boost local food connections to improve healthy eating and sustainable communities. First, to new research which suggests that a spray which boosts the equivalent of a plant's blood sugar could improve wheat yields by 12%. Researchers from Rothamsted, Oxford University and the Rosalind Franklin Institute say this is a bigger improvement than breeding achieves, and they hope their biostimulant spray will be used around the world. Work first began on this 25 years ago, and it'll be commercially available next year. Charlotte Smith spoke to Dr. Cara Griffiths, who explained how it works.
Yeah, so what we've created is a biostimulant technology. It doesn't rely on any gene editing or gene modification or any breeding practices. All we're doing is supplying a bit more of the metabolite that the plant already has to exert some pretty powerful effects on their biochemistry.
And you simply spray it on the crop?
Yes, that's correct. You just spray it onto the crop with the traditional boom arm sprayer.
And so this is to do with the sugar signalling in wheat. So what does it make it do that improves yields?
The T6P itself, which is what our biostimulant is based on, it works as a bit of a sucrose fuel gauge in your plant. It tells the plant how much energy it has and how to use it. And it tells the plant how to use its energy by interacting with an enzyme that every single plant has called SNRK1. And there's two modes that SNRK1 can have, a feast mode or a famine mode. What T6P does is turn on the feast mode of this enzyme, and it pulls all of the nutrients, all of the resources into the tissues where it's applied. So in this study, we apply it during grain developments just once, and this draws all of the resources to the grain, resulting in huge yield increases year on year.
Now, these tests were on spring wheat, but I understand you are doing further tests on winter wheat.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We're also testing a lot of winter wheat in the UK, and we're finding the yield increases in high-yielding climates like the UK are far higher than what we were seeing in Argentina.
Now, this, as you say, is sprayed. So what happens when this product meets weeds?
We haven't tested the effect on weeds, primarily because the timing of application of T6P to the crop will be well after any weed management practices have occurred, really. When it comes to, increasing or enhancing the growth of weeds, I think it's very unlikely, but it's not something that we've tested yet.
And what about side effects on things like invertebrates?
We've been going through the REACH registration process for this chemical because it is a new chemical and we need to do all of those kind of tests for it. And we're not seeing any danger to invertebrates or any algal blooms or anything toxic happening with the use of this compound.
Could it work on things other than wheat?
Oh, absolutely. So we've been going through some testing on this T6P product with multiple crops. We've been doing soy, maize, barley, oats, sorghum, strawberries, tomatoes. They all have effects in all of those crops. We just target the spraying at a slightly different time. We need to marry up the biochemistry to the product. And I think that's what the beauty of what we're doing is. We're trying to enhance the natural biochemistry. We're not trying to change it.
Dr. Cara Griffiths. This week we're exploring the role pulses are playing in food and farming. It's a varied crop, including peas, beans and lentils, all products which are becoming more popular as an alternative to meat-based protein. But most of the pulses we eat here are imported. The Bold Bean Company sell premium jars of beans in supermarkets, and until recently all their pulses came from abroad. Well, now they have a carlin pea produced in the UK. They've been finalists in the BBC Food and Farming Awards. Sheila Dillon talked to founder Amelia Christie Miller last summer.
People weren't even excited by the mainstream beans that everyone knows, like butter beans and chickpeas, let alone understanding beans they've never heard of, such as the carlin pea. So I really wanted to just show people that this bean was amazing and get them excited about the recipes they can use them in. And we do take the dried ingredient to Spain to produce it. Initially, I was like, I was uncomfortable with that because you're like, oh God. But then when you actually look at how globalized pulses are, most of the time, pulses are imported from all over the world and taken to Italy to put into cans and then brought to the UK. So it's no different to any others. And actually, the carbon footprint is still incredibly low because we're dealing with pulses here. They're one of the best foods ever.
There are no production facilities in the UK to jar beans in the way that...
Not currently, no.
So do you want to see some? There they are.
Wow.
My name's James Busher. We've been farming here since 1960. We run a regenerative arable farming system.
And we're here because you're growing the carlin peas that Amelia's putting into bold beans. When you walk into this field, you know, it's sort of flattened, and
Yes.
I thought there wasn't anything growing here. The carlin pea pods are all lying on the ground. That looks like a challenge.
Yeah, the combining is challenging. Most crops we harvest tend to be standing upright, and we can just run low down and gather up the crop. But the peas and other legumes, vetches for instance, which we grow, basically go flat on the ground, and that does provide a challenge. But the combine can deal with...
The combine, which is making a hell of a row
Yeah.
behind us. Yeah, the
It's got
combine,
some lifters
it's got
on it.
lifters, which we can see there.
Prior to us going down this regenerative farming route, we were producing crops whose end location was, we didn't know where it was going. We'd load up the lorry and off it would go, and it probably into animal feed or something like that. You know, we're proud of the product we produce now, whether it's a wheat for Wild Farmed or bean or a pea for Hodmedods or the Bold Bean Company. We're getting a bit of a premium for our product over and above what we would have done if we'd sold on the open market.
How
So,
much of a premium?
with the peas last year, £50 to £100 a tonne. Our yields are lower than a conventional grower by and large, but I think our margins are better.
Farmer James Busher. Well, Josiah Meldrum runs Hodmedods, which was set up 15 years ago and works all the way along the supply chain from farmers to food retailers to encourage more use of pulses. The group not only sells pulses and grains but links up farmers with retailers. I asked Josiah what the demand is for UK pulses.
When we started, pulses still had very much a kind of hair shirt, 1970s image of being the food of last resort. And things have changed dramatically since then. So we've seen a huge rise in demand for the British-grown pulses that we sell, but I know that there's been a rise in demand in the multiples for imported pulses too, and there's so much more interest in them as a food crop.
But it's from a small base, isn't it?
It's from a really, really low base. So in this country, we are one of the lowest per capita consumers of pulses in the world, with the exception of baked beans, where we break all the records. We eat more of them than anyone else.
Why don't we eat more pulses?
I think it's got a lot to do with us industrialising early and becoming more affluent, and pulses becoming stigmatised as the food of poverty, essentially. You know, if you needed pulses through the winter, and they've always been a great store of nutrition through the winter months, if you needed pulses through the winter, you were poor. And I think that just stuck, and we got out of the habit of eating them.
If we buy carlin peas, like we've just heard about, in a jar, they're really quite expensive. British grown, but actually they're a bit of a luxury, aren't they? Do shoppers, do you think pulses should be cheap and therefore they don't value them?
I think there is a perception that they are a cheap food, and I think certainly they are an inexpensive food when you compare them to other foods with similar nutrient content. But I think they have become seen as a very cheap food, and I think that consequently has seen the UK, eating pulses through commodity supply chains that don't necessarily guarantee the best quality or the best flavour, and that by focusing, as we do, on farmers producing quite small quantities for very particular markets, we can reposition pulses as this delicious alternative.
Isn't that a problem for farmers, though, as well? Because farmers look at pulses as if it's sort of like either a niche market or animal feed.
Yeah, that's very much the case. And I think, somewhere in the UK, somewhere around 4 or 5% of arable land use is dedicated to pulse crops. Most of that feeds animals. It could be as high as 20%. What we need to do is continue to build demand, making pulses exciting and desirable and encouraging people to want to eat them. And in terms of encouraging farmers to grow them, we need to pay them the right price.
Josiah Meldrum there. The Welsh Government's launched what it calls a new community food strategy, which it says will strengthen local food systems, improve healthy eating and create more sustainable communities. The idea is to enable more local food networks, connecting Welsh farmers and producers with consumers and supporting community-led food projects. It's committed to spending £2 million on the project this financial year, with funding secured until 2028. And the government says it'll increase public sector spending on Welsh food by at least 50% by 2030. One of the organisations that's been working to support the development of local food systems is Food Sense Wales. Its head, Katie Palmer, told me how her group is involved.
We've been working together with a number of stakeholders for a number of years, really, to advocate for this bottom-up approach around developing local food systems that help support the local economy, that help build resilience in our local supply chains. But they're also working with communities and kind of harnessing our Welsh language and culture here and looking at ways that we can really inspire the people of Wales to want to eat good food and to produce good food.
What practical things will this involve then? What will people, communities actually see on the ground?
Well, I'd like to think that communities are already seeing a lot of work that's already happening on the ground. So it's developing those local food networks. So I think the first thing that people will see is those food networks becoming more visible as the resources that they have slightly more long-term funding. And I think the fact that government is really recognising now that funding can't just be on an annual basis to support these kind of initiatives is really key.
I'll come to funding in just a minute, but practically speaking then, are people going to see sort of a Welsh label on food delivered to schools? Are they going to see connections with local farmers, with local communities, things like that?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I can answer, having just spent many weeks producing our Welsh Veg in Schools report. And that's a really important example, actually, of how that kind of local food approach has worked. So Welsh Veg in Schools is an initiative to drive local and organic production of horticulture in Wales to supply Welsh veg into the public sector and particularly into schools. And it's using that secure marketplace that we have.
The amount of work you've already done then, you must know how expensive all this is. If the Welsh Government is giving £2 million, it doesn't sound like very much for a national strategy.
In terms of the funding, the important aspect of this is that we are securing funding for those key people who are bringing together people and projects and policy at a place-based level and can then leverage in additional funding from other places. This has been happening for many years now, both in terms of partnership with sustainable food places, but also drawing on other funding. And it's a lot more than what's happening in England.
Do you think farmers will see the difference at all?
We know that we've got a number of growers, for example, that are benefiting through the Welsh Veg in Schools initiative. We're working with 15 this year, and all of those growers are linked into the work that we're doing with the food partnerships. And funding that food partnerships is managing to access actually is benefiting local growers because they're able to access some capital funds, for example, which has helped provide things like polytunnels or packing sheds or key pieces of infrastructure that we need in order to expand horticulture production in Wales.
Katie Palmer from Food Sense Wales. On Friday, the food programme will be looking at how public service catering can change to work with more British suppliers. That's the food programme with Sheila Dillon at 11 o'clock in the morning here on BBC Radio 4. That's all from us. I'm Anna Hill. The producer was Rebecca Rooney. Farming Today is a BBC Audio Bristol production.